Everyone, nice to see your faces. And Guthrie, so nice to see you again after all these years, and not just on the social media. Now we've upgraded to Zoom. So we're so happy to have you here with us for this Wednesday reflection as we continue the conversations of next steps out of where we are and looking to make progress on issues that are important to us as a community. So we're so happy to have you here. Guthrie Graves-Fitzsimmons is the author of Just Faith, Reclaiming Progressive Christianity, as Dr. Ray had mentioned. His writing on religion and politics regularly appears in national media outlets, including CNN and the Washington Post. And he's also a founder of Resistance Praise, a daily devotional aimed at spirituality and politically defeating Trumpism. Well done. He is also a fellow with the Faith and Progressive Policy Initiative at the Center for American Progress. And we're just so happy to have him here. He promotes a very progressive vision of religious liberty that champions LGBTQ rights and amplifies how faith communities can empower social and economic justices. And as Lisa mentioned, we were so lucky to work with Guthrie a couple times at the IRI. I've done some faith over fear trainings with Guthrie through our partner organization, Shoulder to Shoulder. And if some of you have not ever done that, I highly recommend jumping into one of those. They're doing them on Zoom now, of course. So it's even easier to do a faith over fear training with Shoulder to Shoulder. But we worked with Guthrie on that. And then also, of course, in 2018, correct, Lisa, I had to look it up, of course, with RiotCon. Sorry, my computer's making noises. And that was also my introduction to CTS at that time. So Guthrie, we came in together. And so we're just going to have Guthrie speak for a bit, and Lisa then will engage in conversation before we open it up to the larger room. So Guthrie, welcome. So glad to have you here.
Thank you so much, Kim and Lisa, and thank you, President Ray, for that kind introduction. It's great to be back with the CTS community. Wish it could be in person, but looking forward to the next time being in person. And I'm excited to hear all of your questions. I think Zoom is an interesting platform, and I love the dialogue rather than talking at faces in a ever-changing grid on my screen. But the topic today that I want to dive into is inside the religious left, which is a lot of my work all of my work at the Center for American Progress is focused on engaging religious communities in public policy advocacy around pretty much every domestic and foreign policy issue CAP is producing policy research and advocating for on Capitol Hill and with the executive branch. And so we know faith communities are active in every movement for social and economic justice. And we're trying to make sure policymakers know about that and make sure faith communities around the country are equipped for effective public policy advocacy. And as I was preparing this presentation, I was reminded, I always start out any talk about the religious left with "this is not new." Sometimes it's talked about as this kind of new phenomenon because we're so accustomed to hearing about the religious right. Everyone at CTS knows this is not new. And, I was watching the Black Church PBS documentary last night. I don't know if anybody else was watching that incredible documentary last night that was just astounding. And we know the Black Church in particular is the heart of American Christianity, the social gospel, and the progressive movement in this country. So this is not new, but it is an exciting time for the religious left. So now I'm going to try to share my screen, and let's have, okay. Let's see if this works. Are you seeing the screen? Let me try again.
Lisa, do we need to make Guthrie a co-host?
I'm not sure. Is Roxy or Shauna on?
Yes, he should be made a co-host.
I think the problem may be on my end.
Give it a try now. Give it a try again, Guthrie.
Okay, let me try once more. Sorry for the technical difficulties. Is it working now?
It doesn't seem to be, but I see that I can share my screen. If you want to send it to email to me, I can probably pull up what you need. We'll just have to sort of talk through it. Is that a possibility?
Sure, yeah.
Okay. Sorry, everyone. Bear with us.
Let me just, I think it might be because it's recording. Do you mind if we try to stop the recording? Or let me try to come back. Sorry about that.
This is your free time, everybody. Isn't it lovely?
Hi, I'm Ani. I'm checking in from Los Angeles from Muslims for Progressive Values, and I'm very interested in this conversation, the Christian left, obviously, because that's how we've been operating. And so I really would like to learn. I'm here because I want to learn where everyone is thinking in regard to the background of the Christian nationalists that we are seeing, and obviously the conservative Muslims have also borrowed from the Christian right in the way they operate and the values that they stand. And so I think this is sort of a nice space for me, a safe space for me to have this conversation with you all. So thank you for having this, CTS.
Yeah, thanks, Annie. It's nice to see you again. And Guthrie is back and his screen is working.
Excellent.
I apologize. I think the problem was on my end. Do you see the screen now?
Yes, we do.
Great.
Thank you.
Sorry about that. It's first time this has happened in the virtual Zoom book tour, but let's jump right back in, which is the religious left. And I want to people have different definitions for what the religious left is. I have a very broad definition, which is somebody who self-identifies with any religious tradition, so considers themselves to be religious, and self-identifies as progressive or part of the political left in the United States, or anywhere really. And people tend to sometimes police or try to say this person is or isn't left, and there's like, how far left are you, and far left, center left, all of this. I take a very broad, this is the religious left is anybody who identifies as part of it, and there are different ways to break that down. And some of the most exciting people right now on the political left, I think why, I was saying right before I had the technical difficulties, it's a very exciting time, which is some of the leading voices on the political left, Senator Reverend Raphael Warnock, Representative Ilhan Omar, and other members of the Squad in the United States House of Representatives are very overt and open about their religious identities and how it informs their political vision for this country and social justice commitments. So we do need to differentiate between the religious left and the organized religious left. So there are many people who are broadly fit that kind of categorization of progressive people of faith, people of that self-identify with a religious tradition and are, hold social justice commitments. And yet what's what we often conflate with the religious left is the organized religious left. And those are two very different things. And the way I break down the organized religious left is into three categories. And, you know, I always my special interest in kind of movements and social change is the kind of organizing infrastructure. I attribute that to both my parents were labor union organizers. And so I always grew up, I'm like, what's your organizing plan? What's the structure of your committee? What's your committee structure and your outreach strategy and all of that nitty gritty organizing stuff I'm really interested in. And so these three categories are multi-issue advocacy groups. And the one I put a photo of on the screen has been the Arc Jewish Action that represents the progressive Jewish community and organizes people around a lot of different issue areas. And you have groups like that working with the Muslim community, the Sikh community, various different Christian denominations. And then you also have kind of broadly interfaith organizations that are multi-issue, like Faith in Public Life. Then you also have single issue groups and coalitions. So I put a photo for the Faith for Equality Coalition. That's a coalition the Center for American Progress Faith Initiative, where I work, co-leads. And it's one we're doing a lot of work around right now because we brought together over 80 faith-based organizations who are pushing for the Equality Act, which would advance LGBTQ non-discrimination protections and is actually going to be introduced in the House. It passed the House in the last Congress and is being reintroduced actually this week, and we expect it to pass the House of Representatives next week, which is very exciting news. And there was this big press conference and we still had faith-based events on the steps of the United Methodist building, which is right across the street from Congress. And so you see across all these different issues, whether it's foreign policy, there's a faith-based coalition working to stop drone warfare. There's on every kind of domestic policy issue that we care about, there is a coalition that's bringing together groups, and sometimes those coalitions change. I've been working in faith and politics for 10 years now, and my first job was working with much more conservative, almost all Christian groups who were advocating for a pathway to citizenship for the undocumented. And so on certain issues like criminal justice reform and a pathway to citizenship for the undocumented, you'll see a kind of different coalition and a broader coalition than on some other issues. And then there's organizations that kind of solely work confronting one issue, like the Religious Coalition for Reproductive Choice, which is its own organization that solely works on reproductive rights. And then finally you have, and that's a zoomed out picture of that same building that's in the middle photo, which the United Methodist General Board of Church and Society, which is their public policy arm, has that sign, and they put up these great different messages that are this like public witness to Congress and all the members of the congressional staff that pass by. And so you have the official religious bodies that then do advocacy, which is a little different. And each of these has strengths and weaknesses in terms of organizing strategy. For instance, single issue groups, can really bring together diverse coalitions, whereas the kind of public policy arms of religious bodies are traditionally very slow to act because they have lots of internal dialogue. And but when they come to a position, it has far-reaching consequences because of that kind of they deliberate more. So the other part of why this is a really exciting time for the religious left is it's an exciting time for the political left. I mean, they go hand in hand, and we're seeing just the kind of bounds, the Overton window of what is possible in American politics expanding to the left, which is something that really excites me. And AOC is such a great embodiment of that, whether it's the Green New Deal, Medicare for all. She is, and not just her, the kind of movement that put her into office is really just opening up new possibilities. There's more, we have a Democratic Socialist chairing the United States Senate Committee on the Budget, Bernie Sanders. And across the kind of emboldened kind of progressive wing of American politics, there's no real hesitation about embracing the religious call to these values. AOC speaks frequently about, I put a quote up here about environmental protections being rooted in her Catholic faith, but also she talks about LGBTQ rights being about her faith, and the kind of call to economic justice being rooted in her faith. And so there's a more willingness, not just from, clergy are very comfortable. Reverend Warnock, now Senator Warnock, probably very comfortable talking about his faith, but lay leaders in the church who are elected to office, I think, are not always that comfortable bringing faith into their social justice work. And so we're seeing more and more of that kind of across the left. Going back to who's on the left, President Biden speaks very frequently about his Catholic faith as well. Now, President Biden and Representative Ocasio-Cortez, both Catholic, both deeply informed by their Catholic faith, both express about it in different ways, I think are both impacting a new moment for faith in politics, which is the recognition of the religious left. So I have 3 updates from what I'm seeing, kind of stepping back from just day to day, plugging away at all these different issues and trying to work on whatever fire is burning right now. And what I'm seeing, what's new over the past few years. Like I was talking about with AOC, there are more overt appeals to religion by activists and politicians on the left. Sarah McBride is the photo right below that. She is the first state senator in the United States who's transgender, and talks about being a ruling elder in the Presbyterian Church. I went to college with Sarah and have seen her talk about her faith very openly. She's in Delaware, where there's another great politician, Senator Chris Coons, who's a ruling elder in the PCUSA as well. And I've worked with his office on trying to get United States senators to talk more about their faith. More media coverage. Presiding Bishop Curry got a lot of coverage because he gave the sermon at the royal wedding. There's not as many, there on the religious right, there are a lot of media stars who get kind of broad kind of cultural awareness. And I think Bishop Curry is one, Bishop Barber, William Barber, co-chairing the Poor People's Campaign, Nadia Bolz-Weber, the Lutheran pastor, Sister Simone Campbell from Nuns on the Bus. There are some more visible. Sister Simone Campbell also spoke at the DNC and is close with President Biden, getting kind of more awareness of what this work that again has always been happening, but more people are paying attention in the media, which is how people kind of, 99.9% of Americans don't think much about religion, the intersection of religion and politics, but they are inundated with media coverage all the time. So that's one way people just have a vague understanding of, what people of faith believe politically. And then this is kind of the flip side to the more overt appeals, which is, and that's Representative Cori Bush, who is a pastor as well as a Black Lives Matter activist, now Congresswoman from Missouri. There is and I talk about this I try to unpack this in my book, Just Faith, which came out in September, which is there is it comes from a good place, the aversion to wanting to talk about faith in a secular democracy. And how do we respect the separation of church and state and kind of, not become sometimes I'm accused of being a left-wing Christian nationalist or, like a left-wing theocrat. And so the aversion to and the respect for our nation's pluralistic values are good ones, but they have led progressives, and I speaking specifically to my white progressive friends who have been reluctant to bring faith into politics out of that concern. I think that's changing, and it's also changing because of the leadership of people of color in the progressive movement. And there's a great new article on National Catholic Reporter yesterday that gets into the fact that this kind of emboldened religious left is very much intertwined with the leadership of people of color in the progressive movement. So finally, before we get into Q&A, are 3 challenges I see ahead for this burgeoning religious left, revitalized, however you want to put it, not new, but something to consider. One is the threat of white Christian nationalism. I think people are waking up to how intertwined all the Christian symbols we saw at the insurrection at the US Capitol are to Christianity and conservative Christianity, and the responsibility all white Christians have to condemn that, to fight that, like showing up for racial justice encourages white people to kind of work on other white people in terms of racial justice. I think white Christians have that responsibility around white Christian nationalism, and there hasn't been a lot of work that really addresses that problem as a unique kind of problem along religious and racial lines. International solidarity, there is hardly any work to connect the religious left across borders. There's some kind of along our immediate border, in terms of migrant rights at the US-Mexico border, but the religious right is a truly global network of connecting far-right Christians across the world, kind of in their work, and I just don't see that kind of those connections. I'm sure there are some that we could point out, but it's people seem that are working in this world to be mostly concentrated at the local, state, and national level rather than the global level in terms of making those alliances. And then funding and long-term organizing infrastructure. And there's a belief that, like, people keep talking about the religious left being new since like the mid 2000s, when I most often hear people referencing when there was after George W. Bush's second election, which featured like a heavy dose of like evangelical appeals. There was this idea we need to like make a broader push around religion by progressives, and then there's like, well, people keep talking about it like it's new, and it's like, why hasn't there been this huge sea change where like the religious left has taken over and had all these huge wins? Well, it takes decades to build this kind of organizing infrastructure. And so I put a photo of Amy Coney Barrett because the kind of far right Christian conservative legal advocacy movement that kind of hit its pinnacle with someone like Amy Coney Barrett being put on the Supreme Court took many decades to kind of build that kind of support, build that infrastructure, kind of do popular education and training and all of this stuff that takes to build a movement. And so I think we, in terms of the revitalized kind of organized religious left, we're still in the early stages. And there was a huge win in Senator Warnock, and I expect many more, because I'm not seeing that kind of pushback anymore that like progressives need to not, the kind of new atheist pushback where like religion is bad and the progressives should be invested in ridding religion from the public square. So I'll stop there with further apologies for my technical errors at the beginning, but I'm looking forward to opening this up to a discussion now.
All right,
Hey, Guthrie.
Guthrie, I'm just going to take a few moments to engage with you, and then we'll open it up to broader conversation. So there are a couple of questions that I do want to ask that I think certainly affect how it is that we engage in our work here at CTS, et cetera. So the first question is drawing on that last point that you just made, when you were talking about the decades-long organizing that helped shape the Supreme Court. Now, the one thing all of that had going for it over that many decades that was sort of crystallized in the other picture that you had of Donald Trump was an unspoken deployment of whiteness as an organizing principle. Now, do you think that the religious left has anything with that kind of cultural and emotive power that can sustain itself over the course of decades?
President Ray, you're completely right that whiteness is the drive, like, and white supremacy is the driving force behind the Christian right. Rooted in fighting desegregation. That is like the origin of the path to Amy Coney Barrett. That kind of thinking, and it in terms of organizing, going back to what I was talking about with my the Alinsky model of like community organizing. Pick an issue that really that's how you galvanize a community and sort of rally people around one specific issue that they can really find common cause and form cohesion. That's what the Christian right did around fighting desegregation. Of course, they then kind of the organization, the movement has evolved to then pick two issues to really focus on, and that was a political choice. Fighting LGBTQ rights and fighting to criminalize abortion, and they make it simple. And the hard part, of course, the defending white supremacy is not said overtly anymore, but it's still the driving, I think, force behind that. And on the religious left, there are two huge challenges. The first is that it's multi-faith. And so people are approaching, whereas the Christian right, the religious right is practically the Christian right. And so it's people are coming in from different religious traditions, which makes it a little bit more difficult to organize. And then there's so many different issues. There is not that kind of, I think we all are rallying around this one issue right now. There's so many people who say the existential threat to our society is climate change. And then, I would say that's true, right? And then I would also say racial injustice continues, and a lack of real reckoning around racial justice is also, at that existential level. And then you have people that say immigrant rights and other, stopping war. The fact that we've been at war for the majority of my life and we just don't talk about it at all is a huge issue. So we do face it's a hardship that there's so many issues that people care about, but I also think it's beautiful. If you reframe, I think you can reframe that challenge into something that growing up, progressives love to argue with each other. We're not a hierarchical, like, the person says to do this, and so everyone does it. And so that diversity of causes is something that I think we can rally around, where the kind of core is social, racial, economic, climate justice, which is still a lot, but we also have the ability to talk about the ways those things are linked.
Mm-hmm. So another question that I have is that recognizing that if you're under the age of 50, you have spent virtually your entire conscious life in a period of conservative ascendancy. Part of what I've seen that do is that frequently folk on the left and progressives feel as if we are always fighting a losing battle, or we're always the insurgents. We're rarely the ones who actually bring more people to the battlefield, to use a particular analogy. And in many ways we we disempower ourselves because we underestimate our own strength. And so, do you have any thoughts about that, particularly for people who really grew up with no memory of this nation before the period of conservative ascendancy?
That is such a great question. And my experience was a little different because I grew up in this like very progressive bubble where my church was a pretty liberal Methodist, United Methodist church. And like I didn't have any existential trouble coming out because my pastor had been Grand Marshal of Pride in Houston, and I was very involved in like the Black church organizing in Houston with my Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee, and then through just the union movement, which is very much supported and by the Black church. And then I had this awakening kind of in high school where I was like, oh, wow, this is not the norm for Christianity in the United States. And it leads so many people to just check out, right? When I tell people, oh, I'm going to church, or oh, I went to Union Theological Seminary. When I would tell people I'm going to seminary, their eyes would just be like widened. And just this cultural norm is such this huge barrier because, yeah, it leads people to just not want anything to do with with religious communities. And then it leads people to feel so alone in their work. And that's one reason I wanted to write the book, which I just wanted people to know they are, we're a powerful force when everybody's added up. And so many people are divided by denomination, which I think is sad because I myself have been on a denominational journey. You know, I grew up in the Methodist Church, and then I went to Union, which is like an interdenominational seminary, worked at an Reformed Church of America, United Church of Christ church while I was in DC, while I was in New York, and now I live in Louisville, Kentucky, where I'm at a Baptist church. So all these people are kind of split, and everyone feels like they're alone, even within their own denominations as progressives. And then kind of in the larger culture, everyone feels alone. And yet in every major city and in most smaller towns in this country, you will find a community of followers of Jesus that are doing their best to engage in this work of racial, social, economic, and climate justice. It may not be a huge community, but you will find communities of Christ followers everywhere in this country doing this work. And you'll now, I think it's great to have role models like in politics, like AOC and Reverend Warnock, but people should also just look around. You know, my church and that denominational blinders is a huge problem. Like my church has been trying here in Louisville to be involved as we can in the Black Lives Matter movement and to protest the police murder of Breonna Taylor. And I hear people saying, you know, there are not other, you know, predominantly white Baptist churches here. And yet there were Disciples of Christ churches. The Presbyterian Church USA is based here in Louisville. And we went to a whole march from the headquarters of the Presbyterian USA Church down to Injustice Square to protest the police murder. And so there's so much going on that at some point we have to stop acting like outliers and this is new and different and just accept it as reality.
Okay, thank you for that. Let me open it up now for a conversation from the group. And thank you for those two particular responses. But friends, if you have